Imagine waking up one morning in a quiet house, the kind where every creak in the wooden floor sounds like a whisper of memories long past. Eduardo, at 70, lives within these walls filled with echoes of laughter that once was, shadows of conversations that now feel like distant dreams. Once a man full of warmth and connection, he now finds himself trapped in a labyrinth of his own thoughts, a place where overthinking becomes the relentless companion of solitude. His world has shrunk, not by physical walls, but by the invisible barriers of emotional deflection. Eduardo's mind races endlessly, dissecting every word, every glance, every silence, not to find peace, but to avoid the raw wound beneath. The betrayal he endured, a family rift so deep it severed ties and trust, was like a silent poison. It slipped unnoticed at first, but over time it settled in, turning love into suspicion, warmth into cold distance. How does one confront a pain so profound, yet so concealed? Eduardo doesn't. Instead, he builds intricate rationalizations, mental fortresses to keep the ache at bay. When his granddaughter Lara's name flickers across his mind, it's not with the joy of reunion, but with the weight of accusation and confusion. Years ago, she was distant, a ghost in his life, and now a letter arrives, a fragile bridge from a past he thought was closed. She reveals the truth. She was manipulated to stay away, a pawn in a game he never saw. And with this revelation, the question pierces Eduardo's heart. How does he reconnect without falling into the same traps? Can he break free from the patterns that have held him captive? In his solitude, Eduardo's days blur into nights filled with the hum of the television, a constant companion that drowns out the silence but amplifies his loneliness. His fingers clutch a cup of coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort against the cold inside. These subtle addictions are not mere habits. They are shields, a quiet deflection from facing his own emotions. Each sip, each channel flipped, is a step further from the pain, yet paradoxically, also deeper into it. This cycle of overthinking and isolation is not unique to Eduardo. It is a silent epidemic among those who carry heavy emotional burdens, especially in the later chapters of life when loss and betrayal can feel like insurmountable walls. The mind, in its desperate attempt to protect itself, often resorts to deflection, diverting attention away from the heartache by rationalizing, minimizing, or escaping into distractions. But what is deflection, truly? It is a defense mechanism Freud described as the mind's way of avoiding uncomfortable truths by shifting focus onto something less threatening. Eduardo's story is a mirror to many who have experienced similar wounds. His intellect, once a source of pride and connection, now serves as a labyrinth where thoughts spiral endlessly, but emotions remain untouched, like a locked room behind a maze of words. His isolation is not just physical but emotional, a place where vulnerability is feared more than loneliness itself. Yet, within this struggle lies a paradox. The very act of deflecting emotions, while painful, is also a signal, a silent plea from the soul yearning to be heard. Eduardo's overthinking, his rationalizations, and even his addictions are not failures but manifestations of a deeper need, to find a way back to himself, to heal the fractures that betrayal and time have carved into his being. As Eduardo holds Lara's letter, the weight of years and silence presses upon him. The words stir a dormant courage, a flicker of hope amid the shadows. He begins to question the patterns that have governed his life, to wonder if there is a path beyond the maze of his mind. How can he uncover the roots of his pain without losing himself in the process? How can he embrace the vulnerability that scares him so much? This is the threshold where Eduardo stands, a place familiar to many in their 60s and beyond, where the past's ghosts linger, but the promise of transformation beckons. It is here that the journey from deflection to authenticity begins, a journey that demands courage, honesty, and a willingness to face the shadows within. Soon, Eduardo will discover that understanding these defenses is not about blame or weakness, but about reclaiming power over his own story. Through the lens of Freud's insights and practical steps, he will learn to recognize when his mind veers away from truth, to map the hidden sources of his pain, to welcome the emotions he's long denied, and to speak his truth without fear. But first, he must confront the silent struggle, this dance of overthinking, isolation, and emotional deflection that has shaped his days. Only by acknowledging this internal battle can Eduardo begin the delicate process of healing, rewriting the narrative of his later years with authenticity and freedom. As you reflect on Eduardo's story, consider your own moments of deflection. What emotions have you hidden behind rational thoughts? How does your mind protect you from facing your pain? And most importantly, what would it mean to step out of these patterns and embrace your truth? The path ahead is not easy, but it is profound. In the next chapter, we will delve deeper into the psychological roots of this struggle, exploring why deflection takes hold and how it shapes our identity and relationships. Join us as we uncover the hidden forces that keep us locked in silent battles and begin to illuminate the way toward genuine connection and inner peace. If Eduardo's journey resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, because this path to freedom is one we walk together, with courage and compassion. Imagine for a moment the intricate dance of your mind when faced with pain so profound it threatens to unravel the very fabric of your being. For Eduardo, at 70, this dance is relentless, a complex choreography of thoughts and feelings that swirl around a central void. The betrayal that severed the bonds of family and left him adrift in solitude. His mind, sharp and cultured, turns to rationalizations not as tools of understanding, but as shields, deflections that keep the rawness of his emotions at bay. This is no mere habit. It is a sophisticated psychological defense, one Freud himself explored with penetrating insight. Freud called these defenses mechanisms, unconscious strategies the mind employs to protect itself from anxiety and internal conflict. Among them, emotional deflection stands out as a subtle yet powerful force, especially in the later stages of life when wounds have deepened and the heart's capacity for vulnerability often diminishes. It is the mind's way of diverting attention from the painful truth by focusing on something less threatening, overthinking, distractions, or even addiction to small comforts like Eduardo's endless cups of coffee and the flickering glow of television. But why does this deflection become so entrenched? Why does the mind prefer the labyrinth of thought over the clarity of feeling? The answer lies in the profound human fear of pain and rejection, fears that Freud and later thinkers like Carl Jung and Viktor Frankl illuminated. Jung spoke of the shadow, those parts of ourselves we deny or hide because they are uncomfortable or unacceptable. For Eduardo, the shadow includes betrayal, loneliness, and the fragile vulnerability that comes with admitting hurt. Deflection becomes a way to keep this shadow in the dark, avoiding the terrifying possibility of emotional collapse. Frankl, who endured unimaginable suffering, taught that meaning arises not from fleeing pain, but from embracing it and finding purpose within suffering. Yet, embracing pain is no small feat. It requires a radical courage to face the self in its rawest form. Philosophically, this deflection reveals a paradox at the core of human existence. As Nietzsche observed, we often wear masks to protect ourselves from the abyss of our own feelings, yet these masks also isolate us, deepening the chasm between who we are and who we long to be. In Eduardo's case, his intellect, which once connected him to the world, now constructs intricate justifications that paradoxically imprison him further. The pain is real, but the avoidance of it is a silent prison, where time stretches endlessly and the soul cries out for release. Social forces also play their part. In our culture, especially for men of Eduardo's generation, emotional expression was often discouraged, equated with weakness. This societal script reinforces deflection, teaching that to show pain is to lose control. This cultural conditioning, layered upon personal betrayal, creates a perfect storm for emotional isolation. Eduardo's overthinking is not just a personal struggle. It is the echo of generations silenced, a legacy of unresolved emotions passed down and internalized. Yet, within this struggle lies a subtle invitation, a call to transformation. Freud's wisdom does not condemn deflection, but illuminates it as a gateway to self-awareness. By recognizing these defense mechanisms, one can begin to dismantle them, step by step, revealing the wounded self beneath. This process requires patience and honesty, qualities that Eduardo begins to nurture as he delves into Freud's teachings. He learns that deflection is not a sign of failure, but a signpost pointing to where healing is most needed. Eduardo's journey into Freud's world uncovers a profound truth. Emotional deflection is a form of self-protection that, when left unchecked, becomes self-imposed exile. It shapes not only his inner landscape, but his relationships, his sense of identity, and ultimately his capacity for joy and connection. Understanding this mechanism is the first step toward reclaiming his narrative, toward transforming his solitude into a space for authentic presence. As Eduardo contemplates the layers of his defense, the question shifts. How does one gently yet firmly confront the very emotions they have long avoided? How does a man in his 70s, scarred by betrayal and steeped in overthinking, learn to step into the light of vulnerability without fear? The answers lie not in intellectualizing, but in embracing the emotional truth, a journey Freud's insights help illuminate. This understanding opens the door to practical steps, 4 essential actions Eduardo will soon explore. Recognizing when he deflects, mapping the true sources of his pain, welcoming the shadow without judgment, and communicating with authentic voice. These are not mere techniques, but profound shifts in being, pathways that lead from isolation to connection, from fear to freedom. As Eduardo moves forward, he stands at the threshold of transformation, a place where psychology meets philosophy, where intellect meets heart. The next chapter will delve deeper into the hidden consequences of emotional deflection, revealing how this silent struggle shapes not only one's inner world, but the very fabric of relationships and selfhood. It is here that Eduardo, and perhaps you, will discover the urgent necessity of breaking free from these invisible chains, embracing a new way of living with courage and authenticity. If Eduardo's story stirs something within you, prepare to journey further into the depths of human emotion and defense. Together, we will uncover how to step beyond deflection and towards a life rich with genuine connection and inner peace. Stay with us. Imagine Eduardo sitting quietly in his worn armchair, the soft afternoon light casting long shadows across the room as he holds a crumpled letter from Lara. This letter is more than ink on paper. It is a fragile thread connecting past wounds to future healing. In this moment, Eduardo feels the familiar pull of his mind, that old urge to escape into thoughts rather than feelings. But something has shifted. This time he is ready to face the storm within, to dismantle the defenses that have long shielded him from pain, yet trapped him in solitude. The first step emerges gently, like a whispered truth. Recognize the deflection. Eduardo learns to notice the subtle ways his mind diverts attention when emotions threaten to surface. It might be a sudden rush to analyze a conversation, a mental retreat into endless what-ifs, or the silent companion of another cup of coffee to dull the ache. This recognition is no small feat. It demands mindfulness and honesty, qualities that many find elusive after decades of habit. Eduardo starts by journaling moments when his thoughts spiral, capturing the precise instant he slips away from feeling and into rationalization. This practice opens a doorway. He can no longer hide in the shadows of his own mind without being seen. With recognition comes the courage to map the root of his pain. Eduardo realizes that the surface anger or disappointment he often feels is merely a mask for deeper wounds, the betrayal by family, the loss of trust, the loneliness that has hollowed his days. Like a patient archaeologist, he digs beneath layers of justification and blame, uncovering memories and emotions long buried. This process is both painful and illuminating. He recalls moments with Lara, not as a source of guilt or bitterness, but as fragments of a story he has yet to fully understand. Mapping the root is a journey inward, one that requires patience, for the true source of pain is often tangled in years of silence and misunderstanding. As he confronts these raw emotions, Eduardo faces the third step, welcoming the shadow. He learns from Jung's wisdom that the shadow is not an enemy, but a part of self that demands acknowledgement. In allowing himself to feel anger, sadness, and fear without judgment, Eduardo begins to dissolve the fortress of detachment he had built. He discovers that these feelings, once so overwhelming, can be held with compassion. In one poignant moment, he allows tears to fall as he remembers the loneliness that pushed him into isolation. This act of acceptance is revolutionary. It transforms pain from a paralyzing force into a pathway for growth. The shadow no longer lurks as a threat, but stands as a guide toward wholeness. The final step challenges Eduardo to speak with authenticity. After years of silence and guarded words, he finds the courage to express his needs and vulnerabilities openly. He writes a letter to Lara, not as a demand or accusation, but as a heartfelt confession of his loneliness and hope for reconnection. In a small but significant gesture, he confronts a friend who had subtly manipulated him, naming the behavior without anger but with clear boundaries. Within his local gardening group, Eduardo admits to his lack of discipline, embracing imperfection as part of his humanity. These acts of authentic communication are not easy. They require vulnerability and risk. Yet, each time he speaks his truth, Eduardo feels a growing sense of freedom and control over his emotional world. Through these 4 steps, recognition, mapping, welcoming, and authentic communication, Eduardo begins to rewrite the narrative of his life. He learns that emotional deflection is not a weakness, but a call for healing, a signal that the soul is seeking to be seen and heard. By practicing these steps daily, he moves from isolation to connection, from fear to courage, from silence to voice. The small victories, acknowledging a difficult feeling, setting a boundary, reaching out in honesty, accumulate into a profound transformation. Yet, the journey is far from over. Eduardo knows that these steps are not a destination, but a process, an ongoing dance between the mind and heart. As he tends to his garden, nurturing life amid the soil, he reflects on how these practices mirror the care required to cultivate relationships with others and with himself. The freedom he seeks lies not in erasing pain, but in embracing it fully, in the wisdom to hold both light and shadow. As the sun sets, casting a golden glow over the blooming flowers, Eduardo senses a new chapter unfolding. The next step is to understand the invisible consequences of emotional deflection, not only within himself, but in the web of connections that define his world. How has this silent struggle shaped his relationships, his identity, his sense of belonging? And what must he unlearn to break free completely? The answers await in the next part of his journey, where the unseen ripples of deflection reveal themselves, and the urgency to transform becomes undeniable. Eduardo's path invites you to walk alongside him, to recognize your own shadows, and to discover the courage to heal. Together, we will explore how to dissolve the invisible chains that bind us and reclaim the joy of authentic living. If Eduardo's courage stirs something within you, subscribe and leave a like to join this shared voyage of transformation. The journey toward freedom is one we walk hand in hand, with honesty and hope. Imagine Eduardo sitting at his modest wooden desk, the afternoon sun filtering softly through the lace curtains. casting delicate patterns on the scattered papers before him. He holds Lara's letter once again, its fragile edges worn from repeated readings, not as a source of pain, but as a beacon guiding him through the fog of his thoughts. This letter, a thread connecting years of silence and misunderstanding, marks the beginning of something new, a deliberate journey to rebuild what was broken, starting from within. His first step is to recognize the deflection that has long ruled his emotional landscape. He becomes increasingly aware of those moments when his mind races away from feeling into analysis, when a pang of loneliness is met not with acceptance, but with a mental maze of excuses and distractions. The ritual of pouring another cup of coffee, the temptation to drown in the flickering glow of the television. These are no longer mere habits, but signals. Eduardo starts to catch himself in the act, pausing to ask, "Am I avoiding the ache beneath this thought?" This practice is not easy. It demands a new kind of mindfulness, a willingness to sit with discomfort without fleeing. Yet, each time he notices the deflection, he feels a subtle shift, a crack in the fortress of avoidance. With this newfound awareness, Eduardo moves to the second step, mapping the root of his pain. He understands that the anger, the bitterness, the cold distance he has felt are not the true wounds, but symptoms of deeper scars. Through quiet reflection and journaling, he begins to unravel the tangled threads of betrayal and isolation. He recalls moments with Lara, not with recrimination, but with curiosity, wondering what manipulation kept her away and how that shadowed their relationship. This mapping is like gently excavating a fragile archaeological site, where each memory uncovered is both a potential source of pain and a doorway to understanding. Eduardo confronts the loneliness that once seemed an immutable fact, recognizing it as a signal from his soul, yearning for connection. The third step, welcoming the shadow, brings the most profound transformation. Drawing from Jung's wisdom, Eduardo allows himself to feel the emotions he has long suppressed. Anger at the family who turned away, sorrow for the years lost, fear of being hurt again. All these feelings are met not with judgment, but with compassion. In a quiet moment, tears flow freely, a release that surprises him with its power. The shadow, once a feared intruder, becomes an integral part of himself, a guide through the dark terrain of healing. This act of acceptance dissolves the emotional barricades, revealing a tenderness beneath the armor. Eduardo learns that embracing these shadows does not weaken him. It makes room for growth and authenticity. Finally, Eduardo embraces the challenge of authentic communication. After a lifetime of guarded words and silent suffering, he finds the courage to speak his truth. He pens a heartfelt letter to Lara, not to demand or accuse, but to share his loneliness and hope for reconnection. This letter is a fragile bridge, built from vulnerability and honesty. Around him, small acts echo this shift. He confronts a friend whose subtle manipulations once went unchallenged, setting clear boundaries without anger but with firmness. In his gardening group, he openly admits his struggles with discipline, shedding the pretense of perfection. These moments of authentic expression are not without fear, but each one chips away at the walls of isolation, fostering a sense of freedom and control over his inner world. Through these 4 steps, recognition, mapping, welcoming, and authentic communication, Eduardo begins to rewrite his story. What once was a narrative of betrayal and solitude transforms into one of courage and connection. He discovers that emotional deflection is not a failing, but a signal, a call to heal the unseen wounds that shape our lives. Each small victory, whether a moment of honesty or an acceptance of pain, accumulates into a profound metamorphosis. Yet, Eduardo knows this is not an end, but a path. Healing is a continuous dance between mind and heart, a daily practice of tending to one's inner garden as diligently as the blooms outside his window. As he nurtures both, he senses a new chapter unfolding, one where the invisible consequences of emotional deflection come to light. How have these unseen ripples shaped his relationships, his identity, his sense of belonging? What must he unlearn to fully embrace freedom? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, waiting to be uncovered. Eduardo's journey invites you to walk alongside him, to face your own shadows, and to find the courage to transform. Together, we will explore how to break the invisible chains that bind us and reclaim the joy of authentic living. If Eduardo's journey resonates with you, remember to subscribe and leave a like, because we are not alone on this path. Our stories intertwine, and with shared courage, we move toward freedom and connection. Imagine Eduardo standing at the threshold of his once quiet, shadowed home, now alive with the gentle hum of springtime. The garden, once a neglected patch of earth, bursts with blossoms, roses, lavender, and wildflowers, each petal a silent testament to patient care and renewal. In this transformed space, Eduardo feels the pulse of life beneath his fingertips, a vivid contrast to the barren loneliness that once gripped his heart. But the garden's beauty is more than nature's offering. It is a metaphor, a living symbol of his journey from isolation to reconnection, from betrayal's heavy chains to the freedom that courage weaves. The letter from Lara lies in his hand, no longer a harbinger of old wounds, but a fragile bridge spanning years of silence and misunderstanding. Her presence, once a distant echo, now steps closer, accompanied by her young son, the small hands and innocent eyes that offer fresh hope. In this moment, Eduardo confronts the most daunting challenge of his life: to transform betrayal into a legacy of emotional freedom. It is a challenge that demands more than intellect or willpower. It calls for the raw, trembling courage to face the self in all its fractured complexity. He recalls the 4 steps that have guided him thus far: recognizing deflection, mapping the roots of pain, embracing the shadow within, and speaking with an authentic voice. These were not mere exercises, but acts of rebellion against the silent prison of his mind. Now, standing face to face with vulnerability, Eduardo sees that courage is not absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. The fear that once paralyzed him, the fear of rejection, of reopening old wounds, of being hurt again, now becomes the very fuel that propels him toward healing. As Lara and her son step into the garden, Eduardo's heart tightens with a familiar ache. Questions swirl like autumn leaves. Will she understand? Can trust be rebuilt? How to speak truths without reopening scars? But rather than retreat, Eduardo leans into the moment. He acknowledges the tremors of uncertainty with quiet steadiness. Here, in the softened light of late afternoon, he practices what he has learned. He recognizes the subtle deflection when it whispers to avoid discomfort. He maps the pain not as blame, but as shared history. He welcomes his shadow's pain without judgment, and he opens his voice, raw and sincere. His words flow gently, like petals falling upon the earth, confessions of loneliness, acknowledgments of mistakes, hopes for a new connection not based on perfection, but on authenticity. He listens as Lara's voice, too, carries the weight of years lost and the fragile yearning for reconciliation. The Bisnetto's laughter, pure and unburdened, weaves through their conversation, a reminder that even amidst brokenness, life insists on renewal. This moment is not a fairy tale of instant healing. There are silences heavy with unspoken pain and tears that trace the contours of old grief. Yet, Eduardo's response is a beacon of calm. His emotional control, no longer a fortress of avoidance, but a vessel of presence. He does not deny the complexity of their shared history, nor diminish the shadows cast by betrayal. Instead, he embraces them, transforming their weight into a foundation for connection. Through this act of courage, Eduardo reclaims his autonomy, not as a man defined by his past, but as a creator of his future. The garden around him, once barren, mirrors the flowering of his inner world, a space cultivated by patience, honesty, and the willingness to tend to the unseen roots of pain. The freedom he experiences is profound. The freedom to be vulnerable, to forgive, to love without the chains of fear. His journey illuminates a powerful truth for all who walk the later chapters of life. That age is not a barrier to transformation, but a crucible where wisdom and courage forge new paths. Eduardo's legacy is no longer one of silence and deflection, but of brave authenticity and emotional generosity. In embracing his wounds, he offers a map for others to do the same, proving that even after 60, the heart can be reborn. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long golden hues across the garden, Eduardo feels a deep, serene joy. This is not the end of struggle, but the beginning of a new story, one where freedom is born from courage and betrayal becomes the soil from which love and connection grow. He understands now that the greatest gift he can leave is not a history of pain, but a legacy of resilience and heartfelt reconnection. If Eduardo's journey touches something within your own heart, remember, courage is the seed of freedom, and it is never too late to plant it. Share your thoughts, your struggles, and your victories in the comments below. Subscribe and like to join a community where stories of healing and transformation are honored and nurtured. Together, we rewrite our legacies, one brave step at a time.